Every book deserves a beautiful bookmark. And if you love cozy crafts too, you'll love turning simple recycling bin finds into 8 charming designs. They're planet-friendly, budget-friendly, and made with the things you probably already have at home. Let's jump right in. All right, for the first step, you're gonna go right into your recycling bin and gather some cardboard boxes. This is super fun. And then you're gonna open them up and then you're gonna measure a standard bookmark size. So standard size is usually 2 by 6, but as you can see here too, I kind of went rogue and cut some that are slightly more narrow. And then I also added some cuts at the top of some of them just to give some extra variety and interest. In the next step, I'm going to apply a layer of gesso on both the cardboard side and on the colored side. Also, I want to share with you that sometimes if you have a really thin cardboard, once you paint it with that gesso, it's going to start to curl. So all you have to do is just gently bend it the other way and it should flatten out, no problem. All right, for the first bookmark, we're gonna paint my most favorite design, which is lavender flowers. So here I'm just pouring out some green paint on my palette and some black paint, because what we're gonna do here is we're going to create 2 different versions of green. The standard green that comes out of the bottle and a slightly darker version of that green by mixing in just a smidgen of that black. And we're gonna grab that darker green and just start painting those stems from the bottom of the bookmark, working our way up. And here, these stems do not have to be straight. They can be wobbly and wonky. Just have fun here and try to keep your strokes nice and loose. And then when you're happy with the amount of stems you've added, you're going to repeat the same step with your lighter green paint. And what this is going to do, it's going to create a little bit of dimension. So once your stems are nice and dry to the touch, we're gonna add in our lavender flowers. So here I'm pouring out some dark purple paint right on my palette, and I'm gonna grab a Q-tip. And now we're gonna dot in the lavender flower shape. So lavender flowers are narrow, but you don't want to make them too wide. I've made this mistake in the past before, and someone commented once that they look like lupins, and I had no idea what lupins were, but that opened up my eyes to a different variety of flowers. So yeah, you totally learn sometimes through feedback, and I totally appreciate that. And then when I'm done with this flower, I'm going to repeat this pattern on other stems in my bookmark. Now, once you're happy with the amount of flowers you've added to your bookmark and the dark purple paint has dried to the touch, we're going to pick up some lavender color paint or lighter purple, and we're going to add the dots with our Q-tip right over top. But here we want to make sure that we're not covering all of that dark purple below, because that's what's really going to give us that depth and dimension to our lavender flowers. And then I'm going to repeat this for all the flowers. Now, once your lavender color is dry to the touch, we're going to add our final highlights on our lavender flowers with some white paint. So I'm not gonna add as many dots as I did in the previous step. I'm gonna add about half as much, and that's going to preserve all those beautiful purples below while still giving us that pop of that highlight. So the last step here is to add a tassel, but stay tuned to the end of this video and I'm gonna show you how to make and attach a tassel to all your bookmarks. All right, the next bookmark is super fun and super easy, and all you're gonna need to make it are Sharpie markers. And if you don't have Sharpie markers at home, that's totally fine. Use any markers you have. Even basic Crayola markers would work beautifully here. So what you're gonna do is you're going to create circles in a staggered pattern all the way up your bookmark with a variety of colors. The next step, you're going to grab your black Sharpie marker or black marker, and here I'm using those dual tip Sharpie markers with one side thinner and one side thicker. So I'm using the thinner side and I'm drawing a wavy squiggly line all the way up my bookmark, and I'm making sure that line is going to go through each of those circles. And then I found that the thin line was a little bit too thin, so I thickened it up with the thicker side of my Sharpie. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be drawing simple leaf shapes through each of those circles. And I totally suck at drawing leaves. It's one of my Achilles heels in the art world. So drawing these simple leaf shapes was actually quite relaxing because I didn't have to get them on point. And then I'm gonna be drawing some simple flower shapes all the way up my bookmark. So here I'm gonna be drawing about 3 or 4 of them, and they kind of look like daisies in the end, but I wasn't really trying to get any particular flower type. I was just kind of doodling whatever kind of came to mind. So you can also have fun here and draw in any type of flower that you like. All right, for the last step of this bookmark, which is what I call the ooh la la step because it really just fancies it right up, is we're gonna be drawing these curved thin lines inside each leaf shape. So what I like to do is I like to start in the center and then I like to move my way outwards. And then I even add in an extra line at the edge of my leaves if I think they're too thin. All right, so I lied about that being the last step. I totally forgot about this one. So this one we're gonna be adding, I don't know what these are called, but let's call them twig berries. So basically they're U-shape with a line in the middle, and then at the end of each line, there's a tiny little circle, which could be a berry or a tiny flower bud even. All right, for the next bookmark, we're gonna paint some bright and cheerful sunflowers. So to start things off, I have my medium round brush and I'm gonna pick up some brown paint and then just paint in 3 semicircle shapes. One thing to note here is you wanna paint them kind of equally distant from each other and not too close to each other because we wanna leave some room for the petals in the next step. All right, once that brown is dry to the touch, we're gonna pick up some yellow paint on that medium round brush, and we're gonna create these 1-stroke petals, which are really easy and actually very simple to do. So what you're gonna do is there's 2 different options here. So you can either start in the center of your flower and work your way outwards, or you can do the opposite and you can start outwards and work your way towards the center. Because half of the fun in this technique is actually the enjoyment of making each stroke. And once you get into the groove of it, it becomes super relaxing and even therapeutic. Now once that yellow is dry to the touch, we're gonna mix up a slightly warmer yellow. So I'm just gonna pick up a tiny bit of orange and add it into that original yellow mix to create just a slightly darker and warmer version of yellow. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over each of those strokes I made in the last step, but I'm not gonna make them as big. So what I want in the end is 2 different versions of that yellow on each petal. So I'm being mindful here of not covering that entire yellow below. And what this is gonna do, it's gonna mimic that beautiful variation of color in sunflowers. So if you take a look at pictures of sunflowers, you'll notice that it has like a fiery yellow center, and that's what I was trying to encompass and create in this step. So the next step is we're gonna add some detail to the center of our sunflower. So what I'm doing here is I'm picking up some black paint on the back side of my paintbrush, and I'm using it as kind of like a dotting tool. And I'm adding these black dots to the center over top of that brown paint. And this is gonna give us a really beautiful and realistic texture of a center of a sunflower. All right, the next bookmark is a beautiful starry galaxy night scene. And on my palette, I have some dark blue, turquoise, and white. And all I've done to create the dark blue is added a smidgen of black into a medium blue paint and just mixed it. And then I'm using a simple like kitchen sponge here, which I've cut into a smaller piece just to give it better handling. And then I'm just gonna be taking the dark blue, the medium blue, the turquoise, and I'm gonna be sponging it in different areas without blending it too much at this point. So I just wanna kind of block out the entire bookmark with different versions of this blue. And then once I've blocked it all in, then I'm going to be blending it. So I'm gonna be taking a clean side of my sponge with no paint on it, and then I'm gonna go over the entire surface and just kind of dab it down gently. And what this is gonna do, it's gonna create a really beautiful blended galaxy look. All right, while your paint is still wet, you're going to grab the clean side of your sponge and some white paint, and you're going to dab just a few dots of white here and there on your bookmark. And then you're going to use another clean side of your sponge and you're going to dab it out and blend it right into the paint below. And what this is going to do, it's going to create a really beautiful nebula-like look, which is kind of like dust and gas in space. So a common issue after adding the white paint is sometimes you've added a little bit too much, like I did here, and it kind of becomes a little bit too light. So what you can do here is you can relayer. So that's the beauty of acrylics, is you can layer right on top. So I decided here I wanted to add a little bit more turquoise and I wanted to add a little bit more of that darker galaxy color. So you can choose to do that in this step if you'd like as well. While your paint is still wet, we're gonna have some fun and add some splatter stars. Now, if you've never added splatter stars to a painting, you're in for a treat. So the key to making splatter stars here is to water down your white paint. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna pick up a paintbrush and you're gonna load it up with that watery liquid white paint. And then you're gonna tap it on another paintbrush to create these splatter stars over your entire bookmark. And also this can get really messy here, so you might want to protect your table or even your clothes while doing this step. All right, for the next step, you want to make sure your layers of paint are dry below, and then we're going to be adding a tree line. So to make my trees, I prefer to use a black paint marker, but if you don't have access to a paint marker, that's totally fine. Just use black paint and your thinnest detailing brush. Now, everyone paints trees a little bit differently. So what I do for my trees is I like to draw my vertical lines first, so I get the placement of my trees. And then I like to paint these, I like to call them arrows, downward arrows on either side of those vertical lines. And then I like to thicken up the center where the arrows meet that vertical line. And that gives me like a rough shape of a tree. But if you have your own way of drawing a tree, or you follow another artist who paints their trees nicely, you can choose whichever way you prefer. All right, for the last step of this galaxy bookmark, I'm gonna show you a really neat trick of how to paint a crescent moon. It's a little bit wacky, but just stick with me here. So I just grab a small round object. Here I'm using a bottle cap. And then I'm gonna trace half a circle with a pencil. And then I'm gonna move over that bottle cap about an inch to the right, and then trace that same semicircle. And that basically gives you a perfect crescent moon shape. I learned this hack somewhere, I can't remember where I learned it, but I've used it ever since, and it's my go-to trick. Then once you have your moon traced in, you're just gonna fill it in with some simple white paint. Alrighty, in the next bookmark, we're gonna paint a summery fresh citrus design, and I'm gonna show you how to paint the easiest orange slices. So to start things off, I've base coated my bookmark with a beautiful teal aqua color and I've let it dry. And then I'm going to be tracing in 3 circles on my bookmark. Now I'm using my craft paint bottle here, but you can use anything that's rounded. And also too, you can create the circles however you'd like. I'm going to be teaching you how to paint a basic orange, and it would work on any kind of configuration of circle that you trace in. So talking about oranges, the first step is you want to pick up some white paint on your thin round brush, and you want to think of the design or the shape of an orange slice kind of like a pizza. So just imagine you're looking at a pizza top down and draw that shape. Now, once you've drawn in that shape, we're going to make the segments rounded at the top. So you can think of this portion like the pizza crust, and you're making a nice rounded pizza crust for each slice of pizza. And then you're gonna pick up some simple orange paint and then just fill in your segments. And then you're just gonna trace a thin orange line on the outside of the circle for the orange rind. Now, the nature of orange paint is a little bit translucent because it has yellow in it. So you can go ahead and put another coat to make that orange really pop if you feel like it. All right, now we're gonna bring this orange to life to give it that really juicy look. So all I'm doing here is grabbing some white paint at the really tip of my brush, and I'm adding in these little tick marks and dots all over that orange paint to make it look nice and juicy and ready to pick up and literally eat. And it also does help here for the orange layer below to be completely dry before adding those white juicy strokes. So now I'm going to be using the same steps we learned for the orange, and I'm going to be painting in a lemon in the middle here, and then at the bottom I'm going to be painting in a lime. So the only difference between the orange, lemon, and lime is the color of your segments. So for the lemon you just choose a yellow, and then for the lime you're going to choose a green, but everything else stays the same. All right, for the next bookmark, I am so excited to show you Blackout poetry. If you've done Blackout poetry before, then you know how fun and easy it is. And no, you do not need to be a poet to do this one. So all you're gonna need is a newspaper, a book, or even a magazine. And you wanna cut out text that fit the shape of your bookmark. And also to note here, I'm using a raw cardboard bookmark as I promised in the beginning of the video. And you wanna leave a little bit of a border around that text as well, just to keep that beauty of that raw cardboard edge. And then you're gonna glue it down to your bookmark. Now I'm using Mod Podge here, but even simple school glue would work perfectly. So here I'm using a local newspaper that I receive every week. And on the front page, I just want to quickly mention that on the front page, that phenomenal and beautiful girl is one of my friend's daughters, and she is a fabulous blues musician. And if you love blues music, or if you just love music in general, you have to take a listen. I'm going to leave her a Spotify link in the description below. Alrighty, now once everything is nice and dried, we're at the planning portion of Blackout poetry. So I'm just gonna share a couple of rules I like to follow just to make the process a little bit more relaxing and also more enjoyable. So the first thing I like to do is I like to identify the text I want to use in my poem. And if you're asking yourself now, what words do you use? So there's different approaches here. So you can definitely make a poem that rhymes and that all the words strung together actually make cohesive sense, but that can be sometimes a challenge as well. So another approach is just circling meaningful words to you, or little phrases that make sense, or even just ideas. So you don't have to get too stressed out about making a complete poem that rhymes. And I did try to rhyme once, and it kind of reminded me of that Lady Gaga song where she says, "Poets trying to write, we don't know how to rhyme, but damn, we try." Then once you're happy with your words, you're going to circle them with black Sharpie marker. And here is where there's a few different options as well. In traditional Blackout poetry, what you do is you keep all the words that you want to show up in the end of your poem, and then you take that black Sharpie marker and you black out the rest of the text on the paper. But here, I love the beauty of all the text still showing through, but I still wanted to show how all the words kind of connected to each other. So what I did was I drew a line from each word to the next, and then I just kind of rounded out the intersection points where that line connects to the word. Alrighty, now it's time to bring a pop of color into our Blackout poetry. So here I'm choosing to paint in these bright and really super simple flowers because that's my go-to doodle all the time. But you can choose to paint anything that comes to mind and that resonates with you. So if your poem is happy and bright and you want to paint in flowers, that's awesome. If it's not and it's a little bit darker, that's totally cool too. I've done some Blackout poetry with some not so happy and optimistic doodles. So whatever you're feeling, just add that in and no judgment. All right, for the next bookmark, we're gonna paint a funky neon art jellyfish. So to start things off, I'm just applying a layer of black acrylic paint to one of my bookmarks. I am leaving it to dry. And then we're gonna create the jellyfish shape. So jellyfish shapes look like, kind of like an umbrella, a rounded umbrella, and then they have segments kind of like an umbrella does too. And then I'm just gonna thicken up all the lines before I move to the tentacles, because thickening up the lines is gonna help create that neon effect in the next step. If you look at a picture of jellyfish, you'll notice that the tentacles are thicker and longer in the center, and then they're more delicate, shorter, and thinner on the sides of the jellyfish. So that's why I kind of made that design. Now it's time to neonify this jellyfish. So you're just gonna grab some white paint or a white paint marker, and all you're gonna do is you're gonna paint a thin white line in the middle of all of your pink lines from the last step. And this is why we thickened up all the lines in the first step, because we wanted to leave room to make that center line. Now, if you find that your lines are not thick enough to add your white in, no problem. Just go ahead and still add your white lines and then use your pink paint to thicken up the lines afterwards. And I just want to quickly mention that this neon art was inspired by my son, who's been asking me to do neon art on this channel for a very long time, and I finally got to it. So I was still in the poem mood after completing the jellyfish, so what I decided to do is cut out a few words from that newspaper I used for the Blackout poetry bookmark, and I just glued them down. And then I took it too far, and I should have just left it without outlining it with the pink and the black paint. And sometimes I have a bad habit of not knowing when a piece is done, and I should have called it done at that point. But hey, just like in life, you just gotta roll with it sometimes. For the next bookmark, we're going to borrow that squeegee art trend you've probably seen online, and we're gonna make it without a squeegee. So first off, we're going to use liquid craft paint, and we're just gonna add dollops of it in any random order at the top of your bookmark. Now, the funny thing here is the cheaper the paint, the better the outcome is what I found, because you want that paint to be super liquidy and very flowy. And that's the kind of paint that you can get from the dollar store. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna use a simple piece of cardboard as our squeegee. Then we're gonna take our DIY squeegee from the top and we're gonna drag it all the way down, and you're gonna get this super cool squeegee, kind of like tie-dye look. And then we're just gonna leave that to dry, and then we can get creative with it. Now, once the paint is dry, you can go ahead and add whatever you want over top. For me, I wanted to add some inspirational words. And what I found was, since this reminded me kind of like of tie-dye, it reminded me of the 60s. And then I'm like, peace. It had to be something with peace. And then I'm like, hey, I have like a tagline, peace, love, and color. So I just kind of went with that. Alrighty, now I'm gonna show you how to create an easy tassel with some yarn, as promised at the beginning of this video. So I have a piece of cardboard here which I've cut out to 3 inches by 3 inches, and I'm just taking normal yarn I had at home, and I'm gonna be wrapping it around that piece of cardboard 20 times. So this is gonna be that stringy portion of your tassel, and this just makes it super easy to make. Now, once you've created your 20 wraps, you're going to cut the other side of the string with a scissor, and then you're gonna set it aside. All right, now I want to measure out a 9-inch long piece of yarn. So I'm just getting a ruler here to measure, and then I'm gonna make my cut. Then I'm just gonna bring the ends together and tie a simple knot right at the end. And then if I have a little bit of overhang, I'm gonna take some scissors and just trim them. Also to note here is you can use any type of yarn you have on hand. You can also use twine or normal string if you have that as well. In the next step, you're going to grab your wrapped string that you created in the first step and that knotted piece that we just created. And what you're gonna do is you're going to thread it behind all the strings, so it's at the back of the strings. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take that knotted portion and you're going to hide it right behind and in the middle of your strings, so that the finished tassel, we're not gonna see the knot, it's gonna be hidden behind. And then once you've done that, you're going to create a loop and you're going to hook the other side in, and then you're just going to pull. And this is going to be the portion that you're going to attach to the bookmark in a later step. Alrighty, it's coming together, it's almost done. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up our scissors and we're going to make a cut at the top of our tassel, and that's gonna bring our tassel to life and give it that tassel-y look. So here I just want to make sure that both sides are kind of equal length. So I'm just going to try to cut it in the middle as best as I can. But here too, you can always trim at the end, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Then I'm just going to remove the cardboard and I'm going to lay my tassel down on the table. So now we're gonna create that infamous bulb on our tassel that sits at the bottom. And to do that, we're just gonna take another piece of string and just wrap it really tight. So to get that wrap going, I'm just using my thumb to hold down the end of the string, and then I just slowly wrap around the tassel. And I think I have about 9 or 10 different wraps, and then I want to tie it up. So to tie it up in a very clean way, I like to take the end of the string and wrap it behind the wraps, but it's kind of tricky to do with just your fingers. So there is a tool you can get in knitting and sewing, but I didn't want to spend any extra money for this project, so I thought a paper clip would kind of work out similarly. So all you do is you take that string and you loop it through the paper clip. Then you're going to use the paper clip to kind of thread behind those wraps and then pull up, and that string attached to that paper clip is going to go along with it, which makes it so much easier to thread through. And then you're going to look at your beautiful tassel, which you just created with some yarn or string, and you're going to make your final trim. So if there's any pieces that are a little bit longer or you want to even out all the pieces, you can go ahead and do that in this step. And now I'm going to show you how easy it is to attach this tassel to your bookmark. So I'm using this lemon citrusy bookmark as an example. So I'm just going to create a hole at the top with a simple hole punch. And then I'm going to take my tassel and I'm going to put it through that hole we just made. And an important thing here is you want to add your string in from the front of your bookmark to the back of your bookmark, and this is going to give a cleaner look in the end. And then you're just going to pull the tassel through, and then you're going to create a hook and loop that tassel into each other, and then you're going to pull nice and taut, and then basically you're going to have your beautiful and easy peasy tassel that you've just created, and it's going to be attached to your bookmark, and this bookmark is now complete. If you're looking for more ways to turn recycling bin finds into art, check out my wine bottle art tutorial here. And until next time, lots of peace, love, and color.